Greetings, greetings, and welcome to the afternoon session of the Presidential Symposium of the Nation's Classic. I am just pleased to welcome all of you here. My name is Alvin Thornton. I'm one of the coordinators of the panel discussion. I want to take this opportunity, because I didn't do it this morning, to recognize in their absence some of them may be here, all of the planning committee members from Morehouse College and Howard University. If any members are here, if you would raise your hand or stand, but let's acknowledge them with a round of applause, please. At the request of our presidents, President Franklin, who's here in the front, Dr. Franklin, thank you for staying with us, sir, and for your being here this morning with President Ribot. The panel list and the planning committee worked hard throughout the summer to put on this symposium. And we're just happy that you've joined us this afternoon to participate in the session dealing with Is the Thrill Gone?, focused on the youth vote. We're especially happy that various media are with us this afternoon to cover this and to make sure that national and international audiences have access to the information that will be provided today. We're also pleased that Morehouse and Howard are streaming this so that it can be available to our secondary school students and the national and international community. A very, very exciting panel that we have. We had this morning a panel focused on STEM and the great scholarship that's taking place at the schools that Johnson and Mays built, and the great young scholars that are coming to occupy the space that they once occupied. So I want to thank all of the panelists and the professors, scholars from Morehouse and Howard University who were on the panels this morning. They did such an excellent job. I want to recognize our faculty colleagues who are here from Morehouse and Howard, and those faculty colleagues who have made sure that their classes and students are in attendance today. We expect our audience to grow. I want to recognize the presence of diverse magazines, C-SPAN, who are covering this event for us. Thank you so much for being here to cover this event for us. This afternoon session, which will last from 2 until 4, it focuses, as I said, on the youth vote and the implications of that vote for the 2012 election. We've assembled a great panel moderated by a son of Morehouse, Jamal Simmons, a very accomplished graduate of Morehouse. He's a CBN and CNN commentator, an accomplished journalist, Morehouse graduate, and we're just happy that he's going to moderate the panel for us. He's going to introduce the panels and make sure that you have some opportunities for question and answers. Make sure that each of you has a program booklet, which is a commemorative document that you can take with you, because it says a lot about the history of these great institutions and the two great men who lead them now and those who led them in the past. I want to recognize the presence of the Howard University Middle School, Science and Math Middle School, getting about the business of responding to the national call for the diversification of our STEM disciplines and professions. And thank you to the young people who I see in the audience for all of your discipline and your sacrifice and your focus on scholarship. Make sure that you apply to Morehouse and Howard when you graduate so that we can offer you great scholarships and continue education. So thank you to the middle school leadership for making sure that your students are here. So now I would like to call and ask Jamal to please come forward and introduce the panelists and moderate the afternoon session. Jamal.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I feel like I'm about to announce the starting five, the starting lineup for the team here. We've got a good group of people backstage, and I want to bring each one of them out with just a little bit of background about who they are. And then before we get started, I'll make a couple of remarks, and then we'll get some questions and some statements from them, some questions from up here, and then hopefully you will be completely stimulated and excited and engaged, and you will get up and ask a couple of questions of our panelists also, so that we can have a very good discussion, because frankly what we're here to talk about is you. We're talking about the generation that is going to be making the decisions that will last for the next couple of generations, and we want you to be involved in this conversation. So the first person I'm going to bring out is the host of radio's nationally syndicated Richard Fowler Show. Political strategist Richard Fowler is an advocate for youth and middle-class families and the advocacy director for the Young Democrats of America. Fowler has been featured as a commentator on Fox News, MSNBC, a variety of international stations, and he hosts a radio program that we mentioned, the Richard Fowler Show. He's also a delegate to the 2012 Democratic National Convention, so we'll be seeing him in Charlotte next week. Richard Fowler, welcome. Our next panelist is Lorenzo Morris. Lorenzo Morris, Dr. Morris, is a professor and former chair of political science here at Howard University. He recently held the Tocqueville Fulbright Distinguished Chair at the University of Paris. He's an author and consultant on black politics, international and American public policy, and has taught previously at MIT. He has been a research fellow at the Brookings Institution, and he has worked as a television and radio commentator on politics in Western Europe, Canada, all over West Africa, and the United States. He is born in Poughkeepsie, New York, a Phi Beta Kappa graduate of Fisk University, and studied at Oberlin and Yale. Thank you, Dr. Morris. Next, we're going to bring out an old friend of mine. I use old purposefully because both of us are now old. Elroy Saylor. Elroy is the co-founder and the chief executive officer of the J.C. Watts Companies. J.C. Watts Companies is a multi-industry business headquartered in Washington, D.C., with operations in Oklahoma, Texas, and Nigeria. As CEO, Elroy manages a dynamic and talented executive management team that owns and operates Watts Partners, the largest African-American-owned lobbying firm, chaired by former Congressman J.C. Watts and former Congressman Ron Dellums. Prior to founding the Watts Companies, Elroy worked for former Governor John Engler of Michigan, Spencer Abraham, Senator from Michigan, and as the Deputy Chief of Staff in the House Leadership Conference. He, like me, is from Detroit, Michigan, and is a graduate of Morehouse College. Thank you, Elroy. Next, Albert Sanders, Jr. Come on down. Albert Sanders, Jr. is counsel to the United States Committee on the Judiciary. He's a principal legal and policy advisor to the Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois. He chairs the Subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights. Mr. Sanders offers counsel on issues ranging from privacy, cybersecurity, to campaign finance reform, and civil rights. He was recently named Impact of Luke 21's 40 Under 40 list. Mr. Sanders earned his BA in political science, magna cum laude, from Morehouse College in 2001. Thereafter, he completed a certificate at Wharton Business School while getting his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania, where he was president of the class of 2004. He's a member of the State Bar of California and the District of Columbia Bar. Andre D. Washington is a senior sociology major from Hinesville, Georgia, who currently serves as the 81st Student Government Association president for Morehouse College. Washington is a passionate advocate for the brothers at Morehouse College and all students. One of his goals as SGA president is achieving 100% voter registration on the college campus. He also has been focused on increasing student safety by building partnerships with the Atlanta City Council and the Atlanta Police Department. Andre, thank you for being here. And since we decided we couldn't have a panel entirely full of men, as you all will notice, we're a little heavy on the testosterone. We are going to bring up next, she's coming up last, but she is certainly not least. She is your student government president here at Howard, Brittany Foxall. Brittany is a junior international business major from Detroit, Michigan. There's a lot of Detroit up here. I like that. She has been actively involved in and served in the leadership roles in numerous organizations, both on and off campus. As a sophomore, she served as team leader for the 21st Century Advantage program and became active in the Howard University Student Association. She also represented Howard on the DC MUSA Council, which is comprised of student leaders from the metropolitan area. Last summer, Brittany interned for Johnson & Johnson Corporation in the global services sector in Brunswick, New Jersey, and upon graduation, she plans to enlist in the Peace Corps to work on business management in underdeveloped nations. Let's welcome Brittany, too. So, thank you all for being here, and thank you, panel, for being here. I just want to make a couple of remarks as we get started. I have been doing this now for, working in politics now for about 20 years. And I started when I was sitting at Morehouse College in a group just like this. I was sitting on campus when Bill Clinton came during the Georgia primary in 1992, and someone handed me a flyer, and they said, Governor of Arkansas is going to be in the King Chapel. You should go listen. I didn't have anything to do, so I went and listened to him. I didn't think I was going to like him, but I sat there. At the time, he was this new Democrat, sort of conservative, and we thought maybe he was a Republican in Democrats' clothing. People don't remember when Bill Clinton was a conservative governor. But I sat there and listened to him, and he talked about all the things that were important to me. 1992, we were in the middle of a recession, and he was talking about getting the economy moving. In 1992, he was talking about Pell Grants and student loans and making sure that people had health care and all these things that as somebody who was on the verge of leaving college and going out into the world, I thought were going to be hugely important. And what we've seen over the course of the last 20 years is the incredible growing influence of the younger generation in picking presidents. And when you think about what happened in the last election in 2008, President Obama, there were 130 million votes cast. And the coalition that President Obama put together was African Americans, Latinos, women, and young people. And let's just look at the age demographic numbers to start in particular. In 2008, 10% of the electorate was between the ages of 18 and 24. 16% of the electorate was 65 and over. In the last election in 2010, when Republicans were able to recapture the House, and there was a resounding Republican victory, there was 6% of the electorate was 18 to 24. It was 10% in 08, it was 6% in 2010. And 21% of the electorate was over the age of 65. When young people vote, they get to choose the leader that they want. When they don't vote, they have leaders chosen for them. So this election is going to really hinge on the turnout of this generation. And people may decide they don't really want President Obama anymore. But you should make that decision and not let other people make it for you. So with that, I am going to go to our panel. And since she was last, we're going to ask her to speak first. And then we'll work our way around the panel with just a couple of minutes of opening remarks from each one of you before we get to questions.
Hello again, everyone. My name is Brittany Foxhall. I'm a senior international business major from Detroit, Michigan, currently serving as your executive president here at Howard University. And, I just really thought it was important that my voice was heard today because, as you all know, this is a very important, pivotal election year. And we each play such a big role in what's going to happen. And I just think being engaged and being a part of this election is so much more than just going out and vote. I think that, as Howard University students, as Morehouse students, we are the premier universities for African Americans. And we're developing the leaders of tomorrow. And as the leaders of tomorrow, we should be informed and we should make informed decisions. So we should know the platform of the Republican Party. We should know the platform of the Democratic Party so we can make these informed decisions and have informed conversations with our peers and know what it is that we're speaking about and know what it is that we're actually voting for. So that's really what I want to push for and speak about today.
Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Honorary Washington. I'm the 81st SGA president at Morehouse College. A special shout out to Spelman ladies that are present, to our sisters over there. Essentially, I want to implore everyone in this auditorium and everyone that may see this recording that essentially we have to be engaged. 2012 is a critical election. Since the time of President Obama's election, there have been several laws and actions taken to suppress this voice in this room of African-American youth, African-Americans in general, the elderly, those who change elections. We are here to send a resounding message that you may try to suppress this voice, but we will be heard.
All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Albert Sanders. I am counsel on the Senate Judiciary Committee for the chairman of the subcommittee on the Constitution, Senator Dick Durbin. And I'm very happy to be here today behind enemy lines once again. I'm with Morehouse, but we've got a great welcome and looking forward to talking today. I hope that, and I know Jamal will lead us in that direction, that we'll talk a little bit about why it's important to vote. There are some people, probably some young people, though not any in this room, who may be thinking, well, why is it important for me to vote? Who may be thinking, well, you know, my vote really doesn't matter that much. Well, I'll start by leaving you with this thought. That is that there are plenty of millionaires and billionaires who are contributing to super PACs and many nationally known political strategists that are trying to do everything they can to make it harder for people like those gathered in this room to vote. Our committee has done an extensive set of hearings across the country, and what they indicate is that it's harder for young people, minorities, seniors, disabled folks, poor people to vote as a result of laws that are being passed across the country. And so if you don't think your vote matters, and if young people across the country don't think their vote matters, all you have to do is look at what some folks in the opposition are doing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today.
Roy.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. Let me say thanks to President of Morehouse College, and thank you to Howard University for hosting this forum. I am a father, a husband, a friend, as many people as I can try to be a friend to. And over the last, say, 20 years or so, I've had some unique blessings. I've had an opportunity to see politics up close and personal, serving at the executive level on the state level and serving at the legislative branch on the federal level. So hopefully this afternoon I can share a little bit of my experiences with you all. And most importantly, you know, now that I'm been out of politics for almost 10 years, it's a different job. When you're in politics, your job is more of to market. You have a product, you have a candidate, you have a group of ideas and policies, and you market those to a constituency to try to move them from point A to point B. Now that I'm out of politics, I don't necessarily see that as my job anymore, so I can have a lot more fun with it in terms of I just want to educate and try to share with you all my experiences as I've gone through life.
Thank you. As a professor, I can't help but make some, I guess, fairly technical observations, but it's important to remember that it's almost a year to the day since the nation became aware of the grotesque and persistent inequality that Katrina showed us when we saw the visible evidence of an, quote, natural disaster brought into focus and aggravated by an unnatural political disaster and inequality. That led to, I think, a national consciousness that the direction of the administration at the period was not going correctly, and led eventually to a change of attitude towards that administration, encouraging 2 years later the Senate success of Obama, and at the same time a reaction. And that reaction gives us a special reason to think about electoral participation today. In that same year, 2006, voter ID constrictions began to appear for the first time in modern times in state legislatures, and now they're all over. If we ever doubted why young people need to vote, I can give you a little number at the end that will show you how much of a difference it can make in the outcome of this next presidential election. But just for a moment, since I had prepared to talk a long time and I've been threatened with microphone cutting off if I go too far, let me just make some simple observations. Most of you have heard these already, but it bears putting them in the context to see the extent of the intent of sometimes a partisan nature, sometimes an ideological nature, to repress the independent expression of the black vote, and I think of the liberal white vote as well. First, there is a thing in many things in Ohio, such as the cutting off of early voting. There was an effort called Souls to Polls. Ohio was the critical state that put Bush over in 2004, and there were 50,000 votes that make a difference. Some people say the Souls to Poll effort was a chance for people to go from church to the polls. Well, the state Secretary of State cut off with local support voting on Sunday. That way you keep down some black voting. In Pennsylvania, and you may have all heard this, the GOP legislative head bragged that by instituting constraints on voting, Romney was going to be put in office. In Florida, they produced a list of over 2,600 names of people who were ineligible to vote without checking. So many of those names were veterans and long-term voters, but it threatened the image of access and the fact of access for Hispanic voters as well. And there are innumerable states in which legislative activities that suggest a conscious disregard for free access to the vote has taken hold, that the reaction to the progress that we felt from 2006 to a few years ago has been concerted. And so what the difference is that number that puts us over the top in terms of those people who want to retain the values that we think the country is supposed to support in terms of electoral participation. 61% is a good number. That is the estimated number of all voters, not just registered voters, that is needed to get Obama reelected. 61% is also, by many, the estimated number of white voters needed to get Romney elected. Just one little point in this regard. Between 2004 and 2008, youth voters, black and Hispanic, went up almost 9%. And that 1% difference, if you just take that 1%, if Obama gets more votes than ever before, except last year, he will lose if that 1% goes. And that 1% is more than the 50,000 that carried Ohio, and it's a whole lot more than the 500 that carried Florida. So the vote may be in our hands.
Well, thanks for having me, and I want to thank Howard University and Morehouse. And the question is why vote? And I ask myself, why not vote? The millennial generation is faced with such, we're basically, if I could be frank, we're generation screwed. And the reason why we are generation screwed is because, look at the statistics. Most of us are graduating college with overwhelming amounts of student debt. Beyond that, most of us, instead of buying an apartment and going out and living the American dream, we're moving back in with our parents and we're sleeping in our Snoopy sheets. So we're dealing with all those situations as the reason why we should be the generation that is the most apt to vote, because this election is going to be one of the most historical elections of our time. And I think a couple blocks from here is the United States Capitol. And if we saw what the Capitol has done in the past 2 years to young people, they objected to 3 million of us going back on our parents' health care insurance. They objected to, us keeping the student loan interest rate on Stafford loans low. They've objected, and the Republican nominee says, well, if you want to go to college, you should shop around and find the best option. When has it been okay for you to shop around for your education? You should go to the best institution that your brain can get you to, right? And that's why this election matters. That's why this election is so important. And if we don't turn out and the election doesn't, we don't have our voice be heard, we'll be generation screwed again. And the reason for that has everything to do with the fact that we've had the older folks we've had them run this country. We had them run the country a couple years ago. The former president was part of the old guard, and they drove us off the cliff. And if we are stupid enough to let them drive us off the cliff again, or drive us lower into the cliff, or in the ditch, I would say, we're going to be in a really, really bad situation. So it's more imperative than ever before in this election for young people to come out, for us to vote, and beyond voting, it's about talking to our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, and our associates, I like to call them Fran, and telling them they should go vote too, because it's not one of us. We need to bring 5 people to the polls, 10 people to the polls, your roommate, your classmate, your boyfriend, your girlfriend. Everybody needs to go to the polls and vote in this election so our voice can be heard.
So we've heard a lot of people talk about how we should go vote, how young people should go vote. But, I have always believed that the people don't vote just because it's what you're supposed to do. I remember being, when I was at this point, people would say, Rosa Parks sat down so you could stand up. Well, that was interesting. It's a nice historical lesson. But what is going to drive us, what's going to drive young people to go vote? What particular things about either one of these candidates ought the people in this room get up and go vote for?
Me again.
If you want to.
I think the biggest thing, there are all sorts of points. I think it'll depend on the student. It depends on your situation, depends on what you come from, that is going to actually influence you to go out and vote. But as a college student, the economy should be the biggest thing, the biggest concern of yours. We're going to be graduating. If you're not graduating this year, next year, years to come, you're going to want a job. Like you said, you're not going to want to go home and live at your parents' house. You want to go and be out on your own. That's what you came to get an education for, so that you can get a job, you can go prosper, you can create a career and be able to be out on your own. And I think it scares college students now that we see they're cutting financial aid and they're increasing tuition, and it's harder for us to even stay in school. So what's going to happen when we're gone and the economy is still so upsetting that we can't even get a job? To me, that's my main concern. But I think everybody is going to have a different concern depending on where it is they come from and what their focus is. So I think as students, again, you have to go out and do your research and figure out what directly is going to affect you and influence you to want to go out and vote and make a difference.
So let's hear from Andre, and then we're going to skip over to Professor Morris.
Well, I guess my frustration with getting folks out to vote is because it doesn't get much more challenging than what African Americans are facing right now. When there was a Great Recession, African Americans are already in depression numbers. When there's jobless numbers, we are double that. It doesn't get much worse than what we've dealt with as far as disappearing of black wealth with the real estate crash, as far as disappearing of black businesses. We are in crisis. There is a challenge. A lot of times, folks don't get irate until trouble knocks on their front door. So I'd implore students and everyone that we shouldn't play the zero-sum game when it comes to just elections. I think that's a mistake that we make, is that we show up on election day when it's something that strikes a nerve with us, when it's emotional, we show up and then we disappear 4 years without realizing that there's a midterm election, and without realizing that if we blow people's phones up in offices across local, state, and federal legislators, they respond. I think I'd implore us, no matter how November 6th goes, stay engaged. Stay engaged. Republicans have to respond to you just like Democrats have to respond to you. Don't play the zero-sum game and say, if they're not who I wanted to win, I'm just going to wash my hands of the game and walk away, because it still affects your life. So I'd say to students, stop sitting down and observing. We are the current, the momentum, the engine in change in all periods. Elections, we are the engine. We are the hope of the country, black, white, or any other, our age range. So I'd implore us to not wait for it to get any worse, because it already is bad enough.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna let you off the hook this easy. I'm gonna make it a little bit more personal. What is it that you want as a person in school right now, finishing soon? What could a candidate say to you that would make you not only go vote for them, but go out and work for them?
I would get behind a candidate who looks at the world not through the lens of his experience, but the lens of my experience, understanding the circumstance that I came to this institution, or came to Morehouse, or came other students who look like me came to, without, and contextualizing it, not looking at it as one narrow mode of this is what usually happens, and understanding that although I'm a black male and I go to school full of black males, we are very, very diverse and come from all types of different backgrounds. So I get behind a candidate who understands the importance of me having a low interest rate while I'm looking to find a job right after graduation. I would get behind a candidate that understands that student loan debt is next to as important as health care and housing debt. These are critical issues for my generation. I get behind a candidate who would lobby for me when it comes to credit cards and the fact that some students have to live off credit cards for meals and things like that, and so making sure that we have that check to power. I get behind a candidate who understands that it is important for him to not just look at the numbers, but understand that when you deal with public service, you're dealing with people and not just with basic facts and black and white and numbers on a piece of paper. So I'm fully supporting a candidate who doesn't just believe that I'm a vote, but believes that I am the hope, once again, for this country, and doesn't look at me as a charity case, but as the future.
Professor Morris?
Oh, those are good reasons. I think that if you want a Pell Grant,
Yes.
it's on the line in this election. If you want to borrow money, you don't borrow it with your word, you borrow it with a mortgage. It's on the line. And there are a host of other little technical things that come into effect immediately that are on the line, but there are better reasons for voting even than outcome. When Du Bois was asked this question and surprised many in early years by saying we should get out to vote, his answer basically was it wasn't just the outcome, it's where you are and what you're doing. You don't want to be disorganized. And the Rosa Parks generation preceded mine, actually, in school. And so when I came to school, there was organization everywhere. We've reached a low in black organizing. We don't want to be on the other side of this moment and say we did absolutely nothing, because you won't be able to organize again. The vote is the easiest place to begin. You can do your social revolution later, but if you want to start, you have to start with practice.
Okay. Elroy, I want to ask you, I think you're the only person on the panel with children. Is that right? Yes. Although Professor Morris, you may. No, okay. So Elroy, as a parent of young children, what is it that you look for when you think about voting on their behalf in the next election?
Thank you for that question. As a father, you know, I'm blessed and fortunate to, you know, have two people in my life, my son and my daughter, that, you know, I'm responsible for them. You know, I'm responsible for raising them, what type of food that gets on their plate, what thoughts that go into their mind. the things that they see here and learn. When I begin to look at the socioeconomic political structure of our society and then look at it from a holistic perspective, you know, I try to make life very, very simple. I always like to say I'm not smart enough to make things complex, so I try to make them very, very simple. And I say, look, my wife's got to drive to take the kids to school. 4 years ago, gas prices were $1.89. Today, they're $3.73. I'm not casting blame anywhere. I just start with the facts, because again, I'm not here to market. I'm going to just give the facts, educate. 14 years ago, my wife and I got married in Detroit. I was fortunate. I worked at Pizza Hut after graduating from Morehouse and ended up finally getting a job in the governor's office, but I was able to save up a little money. My brother and I, we went out and we bought a fixer-upper. I spent $10,000 on it. It was a duplex. My wife and I moved into it. We lived upstairs. Our mortgage was $679 a month. My goal with that piece of property was to use that for my daughter's college fund, because I just, you know, my father raised me to be the type of guy that says, hey, the only two hands that you can trust are the two hands at the ends of your sleeve. So I look at that piece of property. I paid $120,000 for it 15 years ago. Today it's now worth $20,000. That's a big problem when I talk about what I'm looking at for my kids. That fund right there is no longer there for my daughter, and that property will not go back to $170,000. So now I've got to think about another way to start saving for my daughter's college education. Thirdly, I look at the house that I currently live in. You know, I purchased my home 7 years ago. It was valued at X. Today it's valued at X. My goal was to leave that house like many of our white brothers and sisters are able to do. I was going to leave that house to my son and give my son a leg up. Got some nice land out there. It's a decent size and it's in a decent area. My goal was to leave that to him so that he can, again, have a leg up. But with the value depreciation in the house, I've got to now work equally as hard. So I'm looking at housing. When I look at the tax structure that we have not had major tax reform since 1986. Now they're talking about the tax code, they're talking about getting rid of the home interest mortgage deduction. If they do that, that's a killer. That's one reason why I purchased a house for my kids. Secondly, when you start talking about, you know, where you live, where you eat, and now where you go to school, and you start talking about those issues, those become very, very important to me as a dad. On the social side, and you know, and I say this with love, and I'm a Bible reading fellow, that's just the way I was raised. But when you have a public figure who speaks for the country, and when they get up and they make a statement about different orientations, that becomes difficult for me to talk to my son about it. It's just a challenge, because my son will say, hey, the leader of the free world, Daddy believes this. He looks like you, he looks like me. What do you think about this? How am I supposed to act? So, you know, I think you want to look for a candidate who kind of espouses certain views. You want to think locally, but also I then also have to think about the community in which I come from, which is in Detroit, because a lot of my family's not in the position that I'm in. They may be single moms. They may be in a smaller house. They may not have certain car issues. They may not even have a car. Many of them don't, so they're dealing with transportation issues. But I start locally, and I think about, you know, what do I need to do as a dad to raise these two kids? What do I need to do as a husband to love my wife, to nurture, keep her wholly, healthy, and happy? Happy wife is a happy life. I'm telling you. So, you know, I begin to make things very, very practical and basic, because sometimes we could just get so big with this stuff, and it's discombobulated. And when I was on Capitol Hill, I thought way out here. I was thinking about the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. I mean, what does that mean? I go tell my aunt, she says, what kind of bus are you talking about? I mean, I boil it down to, look, you know, there are a lot of people in Washington, D.C., great folks, you know, they work in government or they work in the private sector. And I say this respectfully. If you're a GS level 15 or 14 and you work in government, you're probably making somewhere between $120 and $140. That's a great salary. If your wife is fortunate to work, she's working there, you're at $250,000. If certain people have their way, they want to go back to pre-Bush tax cuts. I guarantee you another $3,000 or $4,000 that I've got to pay in taxes, that's money that I got to take off the table. That's not about being pro-Romney or, you know, anti-Obama. That's the federal government taking another $4,000 out of my paycheck. And I'm not necessarily, when I go back to Detroit, I don't see the value and the benefit of another $4,000 going to Washington. Because then I look and I say, well, look, 4 years ago, the president campaigned on hope and change, and I was very excited. He said, we're going to end this war. Well, we've got 33,000 more troops in Afghanistan today than we did when we started. You telling me to stop? All right, well, you know I can get going.
We'll get back to you. And I'm going to flip
I try to make it personal.
I'm going to flip it for you a little bit. Albert, you're on Capitol Hill and you do policy on Capitol Hill. We heard a little bit of the big, broad framing from Elroy a second ago about some of these economic issues. What are the Democrats, I'm going to ask you, you're not here in an official capacity,
right,
but,
I'm glad you said that.
but as someone who is informed about what's going on, what are the Democrats, what do they want to do if they get back in power for 4 more years? Or 2 more years in Congress?
Well, it's a good question. I think you have to look at where we are now and where we've been. We've been in the middle of a campaign season over the last several months, and people have a tendency in campaigns, I think, to get tired of hearing the same thing over and over again. And sometimes when you hear the same thing over and over again, it's because it's true. The fact is that a lot of the financial challenges that we face in this country, a lot of the policies that have resulted in job loss, that have resulted in the financial collapse on Wall Street, that have resulted in people like my friend here seeing the value of his home plummet, were policies that were advanced by a previous administration. And so as a first sort of big picture answer to that question, what the current administration wants to do, I believe, and what the Congress and the Senate wants to do in supporting that administration is ensure that we establish and support policies that will be able to move the ball forward so that regular, ordinary Americans are able to wake up in the morning, find a good job, support their family, and live out the American dream. You know, and Jamal, you asked a question a minute ago about why should people vote, and what I like to do is sort of turn to folks in the room and ask a couple of questions that I think will answer both of the issues that you've raised. So first, how many people in here are under 26 years old? Just raise your hand if you're under 26 years old, okay? Of those folks that are under 26 years old, how many of you think that you might get sick at some point and might need to go to the hospital? Not all of you. Some of you are invincible, but most of you, right? Well, we have an administration now through the Affordable Care Act that passed health care reform and made it so that 2.5 million more folks like you all around the country are able to stay on their parents' insurance. That's a tangible policy result that impacts your lives right now. How many of you, we're African Americans, we know what the numbers look like. How many of you are familiar with or know someone who either has a drug addiction or is in jail now dealing with a drug crime? Raise your hand. Okay, so you may know that 20 years ago or 25 years ago during the war on drugs, there was a sort of get tough on crime, get tough on drugs mentality. Legislation passed that resulted in a 100-to-1 sentencing disparity for crack versus powder cocaine. Well, we have an administration now that passed the Fair Sentencing Act. And what it did is it reduced that disparity so that a man walking down the street with 5 pounds of powder cocaine is not sentenced to the same 5 years in prison that someone walking down the street with the equivalent of 2 sugar cubes of crack cocaine. We can go on and talk about these issues, but I think what I want to say is this. People need to be thoughtful about how an administration's policies will impact their lives on a day-to-day basis. You're right, folks up here are right. You have to think about how these issues will impact your lives on a day-to-day basis and figure out which candidate is in your corner and will fight for you. It's true there was a lot of excitement. The title of this forum is, is the thrill gone among young voters? Well, the question that I ask is, what was the thrill about? We heard Chris Matthews during the course of the election say, every time I hear Barack Obama speak, I feel a little chill run up my leg, right? We heard Obama Girl, and saw her 20, 30, 40 million views on YouTube talking about the crush that she had on Obama. But I believe that young people and the folks at Howard, Morehouse, and Spelman were not just engaged in the last election so that they could be a part of history or so that they could pursue their crush on Obama. But I think that we are people and folks in this room and represented by the people in this room are folks that are looking at policy, they're looking at how this will impact their lives. And that's why it's important for folks like us to get out and vote.
So, Richard, thank you for that. Richard, I'm going to ask you to do something a little bit different. How many of you all saw the poll recently that said Mitt Romney's support in the African American community was roughly 0? which is very different for Republicans. Usually, I mean, President Bush did better than many Republicans had done with African Americans, particularly in Ohio. Republicans usually get, correct me, Professor, if I'm wrong, somewhere between 6 to 8, 9%, 7% of the African American vote, depending on what year it is. So a rounding error, let's assume that it's not quite zero, because I bet you there's at least one person on the stage who might vote for Mitt Romney. So let's assume that it's not quite zero. What would you say if you were advising Mitt Romney for the day? I know that you don't do this. You do this from the other side. What would you say if you wanted to convince Mitt Romney, if you want to get Mitt Romney to convince some African Americans to support him and his ticket?
Well, I think that's a great question, and I think we've seen so much demagoguery of Barack Obama in this whole week at the the Republican National Convention. I was affording to slip there. But I think what I would tell Mitt Romney is a couple things. I think first, going to Michigan and talking about your birth certificate, not the answer. But beyond that point, I think what the Republican Party has done over the past couple of months is they've really tried to rustle up this undertoned, we don't like black people. And I say that nicely. I don't want to upset my Republican colleague on the panel, but it's true. When you make arguments about people living off the government, when you make arguments about people who are waiting on their check from the government, and the truth of the matter is, when you look at the statistics, there are more Caucasians on public assistance from the government than there are black people. And beyond that, when you have Rick Santorum in his convention speech, I think it was Monday night he spoke, he said half of America is on government handouts. Okay, that number, even if that number makes any logical sense, that means you're talking about grandma who's getting Social Security or Medicare, you're talking about a disabled person who's getting Social Security or Medicare to live. They make it seem as though that every African American is on some sort of public handout, and that's just not true. And I remember, and Jamal, you brought this up, but when I first started doing television, I was on with one of our Fox News colleagues, and she said, Michelle and Barack, they've benefited from the system. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense, but so has Mitt Romney, and so has all these companies that they toed out of, they have this whole mantra of we built it, but all the companies that they've put out have built it. They've benefited from government programs, they benefited from government contracts, they benefited from the Small Business Administration. The facts are the facts, and the facts are that this Republican Party has gone down the wrong path with African Americans. We don't want you to give us more government handouts. We want you to give solutions to our problems. We want you to tell us how you're going to fix K-12 education. We want you to tell us how our little boy is going to get to college. We want to tell you what's going to happen. We want to know what's going to happen when they graduate from college and they have mountains of student loan debt. What are you going to do about it? Tell them to go find a way to pay for it? We've seen what they've done under George W. Bush. They had 8 years of this economy, and in 8 years, they wrecked it. They gave it to Wall Street, and they let Wall Street have their way with this economy. They let Wall Street have their way with student loans. People don't know this. Because people think that the mortgage crisis was bad, the student loan debt crisis that is getting ready to happen in this country is going to be uniquely worse. They are packaging our student loan debt. They are cutting it up. They're selling it to all sorts of places. When Sally Mae sends me the bill, I tell them I know and I put it back in the mail. Because there's no way that we're going to be able to pay off some of this debt. If you are a student that goes to undergraduate and law school, there's no way you're going to see an end to your debt. And to that fact, you don't even know where your debt belongs because they've sold it. Because Wall Street's had their way. And so what I would say to Mitt Romney is you cannot think that talking about, prosperity and greatness is how you're going to convince African Americans to vote for you. One thing that African Americans like is we like a plan. You tell us how you're going to get us out of this situation. And he does not have an answer. For the past 3 days, they've been giving the media 100% of the time, and they still haven't presented us with an answer. I hope tonight Mitt Romney will give us an answer. But if he doesn't, then it'll prove to you that their whole answer is we just don't want the black guy to be in the White House. And if that's what they want, then we would be stupid not to go out and vote for the black guy, because the black guy, even though he happens to be, you take the black out of it, he's looking for our interest. He's given more money to HBCUs. He's given more money to students to go to college. He's made sure that grandma had her Social Security check and her Medicare, and that's why that's an issue, because they're cutting it, and they're going to tell you they're not cutting it. The doublespeak that this party does is beyond belief. And the reason, at the end of the day, even if the economy is not going as well as it needs to go, when President Obama got the keys to this economy, there was negative 8% GDP growth. We are now at 1% GDP growth. That's a 7% increase by my math.
Nice. So, Professor Morris, I'm going to ask you this question, and what I would like for you to do, I think Richard is constitutionally having trouble getting his mind as a Republican consultant, but as a political scientist who has watched the Republican Party over the last number of years.
Okay,
how's that? Yeah, number of years. What is it about what do you think about the conservative, classical conservative, or the conservative ideology that you think the Republicans today could try to sell if they really were trying to go after African American votes?
Well, I think they could do a better job of sticking to the classical conservative approach of conservatism on debt and some government responsibility and some business support. What we're seeing today is not classical conservatism in American politics. This is fairly extreme. For example, the Washington Post publication today, to which I referred earlier, that had respondents in the Republican Party to the question of why few or no blacks, 0.001% are voting for Romney. The response among the Republicans, 59% of them said it's because they want to depend on government and they want people to take care of their needs. That kind of attitude is not typical of the traditional Republican Party. So the question is what...
So what would the traditional Republican Party have said?
It would be conservative on government spending, but it would not be one in which social issues held such a primacy beyond the immediate legislative agenda. You have a position in the platform. And by the way, platforms historically conform more to what governments do than campaign speeches. So while they may diminish the Republican platform or they may diminish the Democratic platform, historically they end up becoming closer to what is legislated. This platform says no abortion under any circumstance. This platform opposes any kind of social welfare policy beyond the most restrictive kinds. It threatens Medicare. It threatens, the platform threatens Medicaid, particularly by devolving it to the states. All of these things are things that African Americans and poor white Americans know as essential to their lives. So the question of returning to conservatism is a little bit different. Now, I can't tell you what that new conservatism would look like, but it would be closer to something that Romney had done as governor than what is going on in the platform today.
Okay, so before I get to Elroy, does anybody else up here have any part of either Mitt Romney's platform or the Republican Party's ideas that you think would have resonance in the African American community?
Prosperity and greatness.
All right.
I think everybody.
Since Elroy's outnumbered, I'm trying to set him up here. So since Elroy's outnumbered, I'm going to give him a chance to get one more in before we go back to the next panelist about what do you think Mitt Romney, part of when we were first leaving school, I know you spent a lot of time with Governor Engler helping him develop a program to go after African American votes. If you were sitting next to Governor Romney, what would you be telling him about going after African American votes?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. Well, about 6 years ago, I used to think I was outnumbered, but as I've grown in my faith and my spirit, I'm not outnumbered because I know I'm here with family and friends and my brothers who believe in Christ and spirit. So I don't think I'm outnumbered anymore. So I've bypassed that. But to this court, the answer the brother gave on the health care, I think the president did a wonderful job getting health care done. But however, as a dad, I tell you, if my son, when he's 26, if he's coming to me saying, Daddy, I need to be on your health care, then I ain't done something right. I mean, I want that brother out working. I'm not going to take pride in saying you got to be on my health care. So again, I kind of speak to that as a dad. I don't want that brother on my health care at 26. I want him out the house working, building his own family. As it relates to, and I have had the opportunity and the privilege to engage with the Romney campaign, and here's the things that I've shared with them. From a micro perspective, I says, look, historically, we've had 4 African-American cabinet positions. Over the last 3 presidencies, we've had that. Now we have 1. Get us back to 4. I've said if you get a Supreme Court nominee, there were 2. We have 1 black conservative, but we don't have a black liberal since we lost Thurgood Marshall. I know you're going to take some heat from it, but let's get another black Supreme Court candidate. We had a chance to do it twice. We didn't do it. A lot of folks will say you have 1 Supreme Court. Well, he's conservative. Our white brothers and sisters have liberal and conservative. So the second thing I advise them is to look at that Supreme Court pick. The third thing I say is we started spending $800 billion under President Bush, and President Obama continued that stimulus package. Unemployment was about a little under 8% before we started the stimulus package. 4 years later, after another $300 billion, unemployment has hovered up to about 8.5%. So what I've indicated to those folks is I've indicated exactly what many of my brothers in the CBC have said to President Obama, which for various reasons it didn't happen. But if you're going to do continued stimulus funding, let's target some of those dollars to places like Detroit and Cleveland and Atlanta. Let's take that stimulus package and do what Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress did. They did empowerment zones. Let's build an initiative that's targeted towards our underserved communities and our communities of color. We don't have any major initiatives coming out of this White House that have been holistically targeted. We have bites and pieces, but there's no enterprise zone or faith-based legislation that you saw coming from Republicans. There's no empowerment or empowerment zones that you saw coming from President Clinton. We've seen none of that come out of this administration. So what I've advised, when I've had an opportunity to talk to the Romney folks, is say, look, if we're going to keep spending, you've got to target some of those money. And that's the same message that the Congressional Black Caucus took to the president on the heels of the continuation of President Bush's spending. And for whatever reason, that was unable to happen. Catch me on the side, and I'll give you my opinion on that, because I'm just never one to air dirty laundry, or just say dirty laundry. I'm never one to air laundry in public. But catch me silent, I'll give you my thoughts on that. And he was on the Hill, so he's probably got some thoughts on that as well. I've also advised, the Romney campaign on the social issues. Look, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, we got to encourage life, folks. You got to encourage it. You know, there's all kind of issues surrounding, a female not wanting to bring life into the world. But I think the federal government, I think as human beings, I think we ought to be trying to encourage that. Maybe there needs to be more programs to say, hey, get through the pregnancy. We'll help you. We'll put a social safety net around you. Let's create some more resources. But let's encourage life. Let's not make it easier for that lady, that young lady who may be confused, who may be tired. We don't know her situational circumstances. But let's not make it easier for her to go to Planned Parenthood and just say, it's easier for me to I can't deal with it. On the marriage issue, folks.
I think that was the last one.
Let me just jump in there.
Hold on, Andre's been wanting to get in
Those
here.
are the things I've advised
I'll
them.
let him get in here, and then I'm going to exert moderator privilege in a second.
Well, number one, I think with the GOP, and one special nod to my friends and colleagues in the Republican Party. I'm from South Georgia, so in working in the Georgia General Assembly, have a lot of friends who are Republicans, and I think we too often make it an adversarial, toxic relationship. I think that's not how you get good policy through. It's having that type of toxic attitude between two parties who govern all people. I think that's politically dangerous for African Americans to push ourselves in a corner so we can only talk to one group of people. To that note, if I was speaking to Mitt Romney and the whole Republican National Convention, I would say the reason why you have 0% of African American support is because you don't depend on their votes. There is no political reason for you to have to necessarily cater to African Americans, so why would you have to design a platform to a group of people that are not, you feel won't vote for you anyway? I would say start thinking with the lens, start over and start thinking with the lens of, okay, we want to cater to them, which means I actually have to get to know. We actually have to get to know who they are, what they want. Because if you look at African Americans and you say we only want more checks and more dependency on the government, then you have the wrong idea. On the same token, I would say to the Democratic Party, do not take for granted the African American vote. Do not look at it as if it's going to be a surety, because the challenge will be when those African Americans sit home. That's just as bad as if they were voting for the other party. So I would say to both parties, look at the African American vote as independent and look at the issues, do some studying, do some research, and say, what are the real ways that we can address these concerns without looking at what has always been historically done. And to my fellow panelists' comment about, looking at certain positions in the cabinet and in the Supreme Court, that's all fine and well, but I personally would say, I don't care what the color of your skin is if you are in the cabinet or on the Supreme Court. Do you look at me as an American and as an equal American, and do you take into account who I am? You could be black, white, purple, it doesn't matter. I want you to look at me and say, and look at my people and say, these are Americans, not just African Americans, but these are Americans in general. And my final point would essentially be, on the note of, conservative values, I think my frustration with the Republican Party has been that they've aligned conservative conservative values as far as religious, moral values with conservative policies, because African Americans by and large are conservative on their views when it comes to a lot of things, but again, we aren't necessarily conservative with our policies. They don't market things to our groups. They don't look at things to resonate with people who look like me. And I'm concerned about, protecting the life of an unborn child, but I'm also concerned about the hundreds of brothers are being shot in Chicago and no one is saying anything. I'm also concerned about the fact that over the past month there's been so many discussions about shootings here and shootings there, but we're more concerned with protecting our rights to bear guns instead of protecting the lives that are on the other ends of guns. You want to protect the unborn, but when you get here, you're on your own. That troubles me.
So I just want to put a couple facts on the table from what's been said earlier. When we talk about the cabinet, let's keep in mind that we have the first African-American Attorney General. We've got the first African-American head of the Environmental Protection Agency. We've got the first African-American head of the U.S. Trade Representative's Office negotiating on behalf of the country all over. And we've got an African-American UN ambassador, all of which sit in the president's cabinet. So we do still have African-Americans in the cabinet. And then the other point I'll make, is, again, as a factual matter, the stimulus package that was passed went out $800 billion. A lot of that went to states and localities to help them plug the budget holes. 21% of African Americans who have a job work for state, federal, or local office. So when you're keeping state, federal, and localities, cities, from laying people off, you are keeping black people in those GS-14 jobs that we have a problem with. But the black middle class over-indexes in the government sector. I have a question for Brittany. Elroy mentioned a second ago in his first remark, he began talking about issues around sexual orientation. According to the Gallup poll of May 2012, 66% of 18 to 34-year-olds support gay marriage. Do you think that that is true when it comes to African American youth? And if, whatever you think on that question, will it have an impact on the African American youth vote, the gay marriage position?
I think it'll depend on what you consider to be the typical African American. Again, when we talk about conservative values, I think that the African American community definitely has conservative values when it comes to more issues that have to deal with things that touch religion. And I think that would definitely have an effect on the influence that that topic has on the youth vote for this election. But with that, I think you also have to look at the amount of informed voters we have. As an African American community, are we really going out and researching what it is that we're voting for? Are we voting for Barack Obama because he's an African American man? And I think if we go out and we ask the majority of our counterparts, I think they would say yes, to be honest. And because of that, I don't really think that it'll be a large issue in this upcoming election.
Does anybody else want to get into this question about, do you think gay marriage will have an impact on this election for African Americans?
Number one, I think when it comes to the issue of same-sex marriage, it was one that, hot topic of debate, and it challenged some of my conventional values, coming from a deeply Christian background in South Georgia, raised up in the church, and understanding what it means to, what marriage meant by, biblical definition, and going through those debates that we have on campus, on Brown Street at Morehouse, constant debate and exchange of ideas, and that's what we do at Morehouse. But I came to, I guess, a conclusion that there's a difference between my values when it comes to the church and what I view in the lens of religion and civil rights and the issue of having the ability to insurance policies and tax benefits and those type of things. So I think when you look at it, you have to look at it from a civil perspective and public policy, an issue of public policy. And I think you should never leave an issue of civil rights or public policy up for public debate, because if it was 50 years ago and those issue of African Americans in Loving versus Virginia, African Americans marrying white Americans, it was highly called a religious and conservative issue, XYZ, but it was a civil rights issue. So I think with this, we have to be able to distinguish our personal beliefs and choices between public policy. And I think once you make that distinction, it's not very hard to understand why you should support same-sex marriage, or why you should support people's ability to choose. Keep your own personal preferences, but understand that we live in a country of diverse and complex people.
only thought with that point, though.
Hold on, Elroy, I'm going to let you get in. But if anybody has a question, please get up and go to the microphones while we're finishing up on this question. So if we can get audience members to go to the microphones.
The only thought about that I want to elaborate a bit is we have not determined medically, scientifically, whether or not same-sex marriage is innate or acquired. No one can validate that. So if you can't validate that, you can't necessarily put that in the same category as me being born a black man. Now, so I appreciate that point, but it's not, and I'm not taking a position on it, I'm just saying it's not substantiated, it's not validated. Secondly, when you go down that path, I think you're right, just much like what happened in the 50s and the 60s on the race issue. Again, you were born black, but when you say it's the same as maybe that's your preference, or maybe that's a choice, or maybe you were born that way, it's just a slippery slope when we try to make that argument because it's not substantiated. And because it's not substantiated, what then happens is my brother, was living with was spending a lot of time with his girlfriend for a while, and let's just say both of them were working for the federal government. Well, she couldn't get his benefits from the federal government because they weren't married. But if my brother happened to live with a man, they could get benefits. So then you turn around and you discriminate against my brother because he's with the female, but if he were with the man, he can take advantage of some of the benefits from the federal government. So it's just a challenging situation.
Which rule is that?
What's that?
Which rule is that?
It's an executive order that the president signed.
So you're saying heterosexual domestic partners don't get the same benefits as homosexual domestic
unless they're married.
I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's accurate, but let me say this about the point you made earlier. There is a slippery slope, as you just mentioned. There's a slippery slope when you talk about the right to life, and as my friend here said, you stop it at once the child is born. I think that it's irrelevant whether or not there's scientific verification or lots of studies. All you need to do is know and look and say, listen, it's okay for the federal government to step in and say it's inappropriate for one person to beat another person down because of their perceived sexual orientation. It's okay for the federal government or the state government to step in and say, listen, I understand that we may see things differently. We may have a different religious perspective, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. That does not authorize or should not allow discrimination. And there are a lot of circumstances, as my friend here, as I mentioned a second ago, said, where people have stood behind religious, moral, and other justifications in order to justify bigotry, in order to justify discrimination. And I think that living in 2012, particularly as minorities, whatever our individual thoughts and views are on the issue, we should step up and stand up and say we're not going to tolerate discrimination based on what someone else is or what someone else does.
And that's a basic principle and tenet. I mean, you want to teach love, and I make it simple. And you're making a policy argument. I just make an argument from the heart on that. Look, I got a son. I hope and pray that he marries a lady. That's just my personal opinion. If he marries a man, I'm not going to love my son any less than I would love him if he married a female. I would hope and I would fight to the death for anybody if he discriminated against my son. This is personal. So all I'm saying on this issue is that my grandmother used to say, hey, boy, you're just passing through. You're in this world. You're not of it. I just boil this down, friends. The Bible makes it real clear on that issue. The Bible makes it real clear on love. And I'll just leave it at that. And I'm a believer in the Bible. And the Bible makes it real clear on that.
Richard.
And if you want to support policy over the Bible, I respect that.
But it's not a matter of supporting. Wait 1 second, though. It's not a matter of supporting.
From Richard, then we're going to go to the audience.
It's not a matter of supporting policy over the Bible. I think if Jesus were around today, he would hang out with the least of these, the crackheads, the people who are on drugs, people who are part of the LGBT community. And beyond that point, we can't sit here and we talk. I love this argument about the Republicans believe that we should have small government. The government should be in your wallet. They shouldn't be in your pocket, but they want the government to be in a woman's body. And to me, that makes absolutely no sense. And to add to that point, we can't say that we want the government to be in a woman's body and she cannot have an abortion if she chooses to do so. I'm not saying abortion is a good thing. I don't think it is. When the vice president nominee from the Republican Party in his budget says he wants to cut programs like women's, infants, and children, so when she has this baby that she's being forced to have by the government, she cannot get milk, she cannot get cheese, she cannot get eggs for her child. So what do you expect her to do? And if that child is slow in developing, his Head Start funding is gone because of people like Paul Ryan. So the Republican Party has created a dichotomy for people. You can't tell a woman what to do with her, force her what to do with her body, and then when she has this child, give her no solutions, no alternatives. And that's the problem that they have going into this election.
I don't disagree with that, but again, I try to keep it real simple. As a dad, I mean, when I was on Capitol Hill, I would get into a big policy debate with you, my friend. But
it's not a policy, it's just common sense.
I just make it, and I try to make it real simple. Look, I got a daughter. If somebody raped my daughter, I don't know. I honestly don't know how I would deal with that. I don't know, man. If my daughter wanted to get rid of her child, I would not encourage her to get rid of that child. I would try to do everything in my power to encourage her to bring that child into this world. That's just a simple belief. That's not
But the
policy.
question, Elroy, is should the government make that decision for your daughter, or should your daughter and you be able to make that decision as a family about what she should do?
I think the government should create, my personal views, I think the government should create a system where if you're not over 18 years old or 21, that you should consult with an adult or a parent or a pastor before that decision is made. I think that should be the role of government. Right, so I'm just saying, that's as far as I take it. In terms of whether it's illegal or legal, I think that's a personal decision between.
But it's not a personal decision, it's a government decision.
No, I'm giving you my point.
Okay.
I'm saying I think that should be a personal decision between that. I think that should be a personal decision between my daughter and myself. Now, this is where you get into the policy, because I've had these debates, Jamal, these discussions. We've all worked on Capitol Hill. We've been in the executive office. Where you get into a policy discussion and where it gets a slippery slope is who should pay for it. You know, you're paying taxes. You've got people who disagree with it. You've got doctor issues. You've got medical issues. So then you get into a big realm. But again, when you keep it basic and simple, do I think the federal government should tell me as a dad if my daughter got raped, and say I prayed on it, my wife and I, and we decided that we didn't want her to bear that for 9 months, I don't think the federal government has the right to come into my household and tell me how to raise my daughter.
So you're pro-choice?
But at the same time, no, I'm not. I support life. I support life. But at the same time, I get frustrated as a human being when I look at most Planned Parenthood agencies. The majority of them are in areas of color. So that makes it a little bit easier for that child who may not be fortunate to have a dad or a mom in the household to go right next door.
Let's get the professor. Brittany, did you want to? I saw you.
So that takes it to a policy debate.
I saw you kind of making some.
Yeah, so my biggest concern with this whole argument is really the wording of what the policy says, of what the platform says, which is they have this idea of legitimate rape. So if you are raped and it's legitimate, then there are some Republicans that believe that your body will not let you become pregnant. If it's real rape, then you don't become pregnant, and that's why this policy is okay. You can't tell me, you can't be a party that wants to pull government back, that wants to let the Wall Street do what it is that they want to do, and pull back government regulation, but at the same breath say that they should be able to tell me whether or not I keep my child or not, regardless of whether it's rape, incest, or if it causes harm to the mother. And that's just really the biggest issue to me. And when you asked whether or not, the initial question was, do I think gay marriage will be an issue in this election? No, I don't. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the Republican Party and you look at the Democratic Party, and you are an African-American person, you cannot tell me that the Republican Party is for you. You can't. I don't believe it. But that's my opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion.
All right, let's go to the audience so we can start this conversation.
How's it going, panel? My name is Terrence.
I'm sorry. So let's start. We're going to start here, then we're going to go over there, and I want to hear your name, any affiliation you want to name, and then a question that ends in a question mark, not a speech.
Got you, Jamal. So my name is Terrence Woodbury, Morehouse College, class of 2009. My question is to anyone on the panel, primarily, forgive me if I don't remember everyone's name, but primarily for the professor as a political scientist, and to my Republican colleague, for Mr. Saylor, sorry. So do you guys believe that there's a way for African Americans as a community to coalition under one umbrella, using all of the organizations at our disposal, may it be NAACP, may it be Urban League, may it be the CBC, the Black Church, similarly to what the Jewish community has done under the umbrella of AIPAC. Now, there is no mistake as to whether or not AIPAC is one of the most aggressive and effective lobbying bodies on Capitol Hill, and has been able to push the policy of the Jewish community very effectively. The African American community, however, is so disjointed in so many different factions that I believe that has affected our ability to be effective policy makers.
Okay, so the question is about, is there possible that we can have a coalition?
I think that's a great question. I mean, when I was a student at Morehouse College, I kind of wrote a little paper, and I said, how do we advance where we are as a nation and as a people? And I looked at the Hispanic community, I looked at the Jewish community, I looked at every other community. And there's no other community in the face of, in the United States of America that votes overwhelmingly 90% for one party. Prior to 1936, I realized that we all voted Republican. That was a bad model. After 1936, we all vote Democrat. I think that's a bad model. We're the only race of people in the United States of America that does that. There's enough blame to go around, but what that has done to us as a people, it's created a system inside of the Republican Party where Republicans say we've got to win without them. So if somebody starts with, whether they're racist or not racist, because there's races in both parties, people say stupid things in both parties. I used to get into that debate, I just don't anymore. For every Todd Aiken, there's a person on the left, and I'm just about trying to build people up versus tearing somebody down.
Just joking.
So that was a stupid discussion. Do I think that's reflective of the whole party or the man in his totality? No, I don't. I really don't believe that. I don't think anybody, he said something stupid. But my point there, and I'm not trying to defend him, and I don't come to these discussions trying to defend Republicans, nor do I come trying to defend Democrats. I come to say, here's what I believe and here's what I support. So getting back to the coalition point, I think if we were able to look at some kind of model where we took 20% of the African-American community and we said, okay, you be a Democrat, get engaged, go work on the Hill, raise money and be a big fundraiser, do the policy stuff, do the arguments. Then you take another 20% and you say, okay, you go and join the Republican Party, you work for Republicans, you get on their staff. That's 40%. You take the rest of the 60% of the folks and you say, you don't get engaged in any party. You stay out, you hold your vote, you be a businessman, you be a mom, you be a teacher, do whatever. Now you got 20% engaged in the Democratic Party at the highest levels. You got your Donna Brazils, your Jamal Simmons, and I forget the brother's name here.
Not a high level.
Well, you're high enough level for me. So you've got.
I'm going to get to the professors.
And then you take the Republican side, and you get the same thing. And what you do is you come up and you create a 10-point plan, and you say these are the things that we most care about in our community. And you let your Republican colleagues take that plan, and you let your Democratic colleagues take that plan. They present it to the campaigns, to the governors, to the mayors, and you say, if you can agree and if you can do 6 of these things, we're going to go back to the 60% and we're going to try to get our folks to turn out. Now, if I'm a Republican, and if Jamal comes to me and says, hey, I got my candidate to bite on 6 of these issues, and if I have to say, well, I could only get Republican John Engler to bite on 3, then I'm going to go tell all my Republicans to say, hey, we're going with Jamal this election because I couldn't get my guy to support. He would only support 3 things. We need to have no permanent friends, no permanent enemies, just permanent interests. Until we get about the business of doing that versus all this back and forth arguing about what Todd Aiken said, arguing about what Democratic policy is better than this. I mean, look, fellas, our friends, I've done that for 20 years. We're in the same boat. Unemployment is getting higher. There are more brothers and sisters in jail. Okay. Abortion is getting higher. Less of us are getting married. You can go down that list. Insanity, my friends, is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting new results. That is the definition of insanity. So that's just my point up here. I'm not advocating for Romney nor am I against Obama. I'm pro-us.
Good one. Professor Morris, you also probably remember the Gary Convention and other efforts in the past to try to bring African Americans under a similar tent. Do you think this is something that the African Americans can do?
I think at Howard and at other universities, we've also tried to organize policy-focused conferences where people could articulate things for national interest. One of the things that's interesting is winning sometimes can be a little bit of an impairment. When Obama won, the effort and the energy that African Americans put into his victory meant that many of the associations which had existed before seemed to be less visible. This has happened before. I mean, and it changes things. But the one thing to remember in response to this comment, we're the only race that the Republican Party, who votes the Republican Party, has not pursued. They have offered zero, so they get zero response. There is nothing in any of the associations that can be said to lead African American communities, the large associations, whose agenda they have responded to, cited or articulated. Now, the problem is, and the question was about coalition building, and I think that is an important issue. Obviously, it would be easy to build coalitions if the Republican ticket wins, because there'd be a lot of black people organized, but we don't want to have coalitions that are just responsive. The problem is that we let some of these organizations were not as responsive as they should have been after Obama got into the White House. You cannot maintain a left without a further leaning left. And there are a variety of explanations for that. But I can think of some places where we didn't demand enough. And probably my simplest example, a little one to be simple, comes to mind is Shirley Sherrod. Remember that? And we immediately concede to this orchestrated right-wing media.
Can you explain who she is so people watching?
Okay, this was the African-American Secretary of Agriculture who was falsely accused of making, quote, racist statements. And some of the civil rights organizations joined in that accusation. I won't name them. But the point here is that we should take every opportunity to organize an agenda further to the left. And with that, ironically, would come some of the white American left. So you have both groups that are not as well organized as they should have been. And there's a long explanation or discussion as to why not, but I don't think it's impossible. And I think certainly if there's a conceivable agenda set. For example, one of the reasons that African Americans switched to the Democratic Party in the 30s was because Roosevelt had a progressive agenda. If that progressive agenda looks more viable and you get over the Republican backlog, and that's not a partisan statement, it's a descriptive statement, then you will get more coalitions mobilized. And if you watch testimony in Congress the other day, you will see African Americans taking the lead in testifying in favor of Medicare. So once you have a feasible agenda, you'll get somewhere. Right now, we've been stuck in fighting back.
Here, question.
Hi, my name is Sydney Brown. I'm a student here. I'm a freshman.
I'm sorry, it's hard to hear you. Can you try to
My name is Sydney Brown. I'm a freshman here, psychology major. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned something about substantiating a sexuality. I don't need anyone to substantiate, any scientist or politician to substantiate my sexuality or who I am as a woman. Any of that. I need the government to stay out of my body. You can stay out of my relationships until I'm ready to get married. Okay, I don't need a scientist to tell me who I am or whether or not I'm real or whether or not it's relevant to what your political standing is. I know I need a candidate that's going to fight for me in every demographic that I represent. If I want gay marriage, I need a candidate who's going to represent that. If I want the government to stay out of my body, I want a candidate that represents that. If I want a candidate that's going to make sure my kids are able to pay for school or even go to school for free, I want to have a candidate that represents that. I don't need anyone to tell me that I am real, that I am, let's say, a real woman, a real lesbian, or whatever. That's my business, not the government's. I just want to let that be clear.
And I agree with
I don't have a question.
And I hear you speaking from your heart. So I'm going to talk back to you from my heart. I don't know you, but I love you as a brother, regardless of what a sister, brother, sister, regardless of what your orientation is. That's not my issue here. I apologize, I misspoke, but I thought I couldn't tell. But my point is, regardless of what your orientation is or what you think other people's orientation should be, you're absolutely right. That's not the government's business. The government should be about talking love and support and respect. And I believe that from the bottom of my heart. But again, I support the Bible. And I don't think it's just like it's not fair for me to tell you what you should and shouldn't do with your life. It's not fair for you to say it's not appropriate for me to speak truth to the Bible.
So
the Bible.
So do you have a question?
Science. It's a faith. That's not. You're right. The Bible is not science. It's faith. No, I made a point. I said science in America and in the free world, you have molecules, you have biology and science for most
let's just say so we can move past this point that there are questions about beliefs that occur and there are questions about public policy that occur. And that our founding fathers established a government without regard to religion. And so as a public policy matter, which is what we're here arguing about politics and policy, not as much, while faith informs our politics and policy, that we have to sort of make judgments about how do we have a system and a government that treats all citizens fairly regardless of their beliefs and backgrounds.
And I extended.
Okay. So do you want to ask another question, or are we going to go to the person behind you? Okay, thank you very much for your statement.
Can I jump in right there?
Yeah, go ahead, Andre. As the next person comes up, and then we'll come over here, but we're going to go to her first. Andre, go.
Just to bridge that gulf just a little bit, there's broad policy statements. My colleague to my left has often said he's speaking from the heart. He's very, very simple, basic, black and white. What we need to essentially emphasize is that when it comes to government, there is no just black and white. It is very, very circumstantial, subjective, and the mistake of people who govern based upon their narrow view is that they paint things in a very, very narrow light, when most things are complex and have broad social forces that influence what happens. So whenever you try to take a sweeping policy and put it in a narrow light, it disenfranchises, it damages, it's unintentionally malicious. So as well-intended as you may be, and as well-intended as a lot of folks are in government, you can't paint issues in a very, very narrow, simple light. Even if you're doing it in love, you have to contextualize it. You have to make it as diverse and as complex as it is.
And that's the problem with the debate.
So let's get the question here.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Speaking of disenfranchisement.
I'm sorry, can we hear your name? Can we hear your name and your identification?
Sorry, it's not important. Eleanor Traylor. I work here at Howard.
All right.
Some
yes,
people call me professor. So I am just wanting to speak to disenfranchisements, to slippery slopes, to speakings from the heart and like manners. And I wish to address to the panel an enigma that I experience. I am perplexed. And
that experience will end in a question, right?
Yes, and this is the question. I'd like the enigma to be addressed. How can a body of leaderly speakers, those who desire public office of any stripe, tolerate in the least the suppression of the very definition of what America has come to mean to the world? That is the right to vote.
So your question is about voter ID laws and the suppression of the vote?
I have not heard that spoken to.
Okay. Do you all think that voter ID laws will have an impact, and why, and how will that play out in this election season? We'll start here.
They'll certainly have an impact, and I'm glad we're having a chance to talk about this. There have been 3 types of voter suppression laws that are running rampant across this country. Folks should know that since the 2010 election, just about 40 states have introduced laws that would require some type of photo identification to be shown at the polls before you vote. Several of those states have passed and enacted those laws. What does that mean? Well, some people think, hey, you know, pull out the ID out of your pocket. Well, actually, it's not that simple. The devil is always in the details, and what we've seen based on what the Brennan Center, for example, at the New York University Law School has said, there are 5 million people who do not right now have the kind of ID that will satisfy one of these voter ID laws. Who are those people? Surprise, surprise. African Americans, Latinos, young voters, disabled people, people of lower income status. And it is incredibly unfortunate, because the point that the professor is making is that the right to vote is one that is essential and sacred in this country. And so if you think about it, the Constitution has been amended more times to protect or expand the right to vote than it has on any other issue. There's 6 constitutional amendments that address that point. And now on our watch, after we've elected the first black president, a year after we have erected the Martin Luther King Memorial, and 47 years after John Lewis and others engaged in what we call Bloody Sunday, we are now watching and allowing a series of states to pass these laws that will have a direct impact on the vote that you and I and people that look like us are going to cast. So it's right to raise that point. But guess what? It's not just voter ID. It's voter ID, and it's also rolling back early registration. early voting periods, excuse me. So early voting, who votes early? People that can't necessarily take off a long day of work. Who votes early? People who may need help getting to the polls, people who are in school, and African Americans. On the Sunday before the last election in Florida, African Americans and Latinos combined were 51% of all the people that cast a vote on that day. Well, how do you think Governor Rick Scott and the Republicans in Florida responded to that? They said no more early voting on the Sunday before the election. All across the country, whether it's Florida or Ohio, we are seeing a large, coordinated, well-funded attack on the right to vote, and we shouldn't stand for it. But the problem is it doesn't stop there. It's not just voter ID. It's not just cutting early voting periods. It's making it harder for people to register to vote. Exactly. In 2008, 83% of young people under the age of 30 that were registered got out to the polls and voted. Follow me. The problem is that only 54% of young people are registered. So what conclusion do you make there? If young people are registered, they'll get up on election day and they will go and vote. So what do you do about that? Let's go back to Florida, a critical state, as we all know, a battleground state. What did Florida do? They said, we are going to put up so many barriers on third-party organizations registering people to vote that basically it dried the whole process up. And so now for the first time in their history, the League of Women Voters, Boy Scouts, Rock the Vote, a number of other folks have said, we're not going to register people to vote because of these laws. Well, a couple months ago, the New York Times did a study and said, at this point in time, there are 90,000 less new registered voters in Florida than there were in 2008. Jamal walked through the numbers earlier about how young people can have a direct impact on this election. And the truth is that we're going to see not only these voter ID laws, but cutting early voting and voter registration have a direct impact on whether our fellow citizens can actually get out there and exercise the right to vote. Last thing, let me say this. Who has a smartphone? Everybody has a smartphone. Raise your hand. Pull it out. Go to your app store, whether you're on, I'm not getting paid to do this, trust me. Whether you're on Android or iPhone, and pull down the election protection application. Get that election protection application that's supported by Rock the Vote and Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. It will confirm that you're registered. It will tell you where your polling place is. It will give you a number to call if you have problems on election day, and it will help you report any issues that you see. The folks around the country see that this is a big issue, it's important, and we have to take that power back into our own hands.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Foutland. I just want to ask one question.
We've got to move on to I'm sorry, can we move on to the next question?
Oh, sorry.
We got a lot of questions, so I just want to keep, but the panel will be here. The panel will be here afterwards, and you'll be able to ask them a follow-up. We have a question from Twitter that is on that, and I'm going to let the two student presidents get involved. Is it more important for college students to vote in where they go to school or to vote at home, since they go to school in a certain state for 9 months out of the year? And so this is kind of piggybacking on this question of registration.
Well, to the note of registration, we have that question a lot at Morehouse because we have a lot of students that are from out of state. So we do this for incoming freshmen that will spend the next 4 years in the state of Georgia, living and governed by policies in Georgia. We encourage them to register as Georgia voters. We do not encourage our students who receive state funding, state grants, and things like that to register in the state of Georgia because that will then cut their funding. But for students who are planning to move or have for other reasons registration back home, we do encourage them to stay in areas like swing states or states that are critical where their vote is a lot more influential. But for incoming freshmen, sophomores, we encourage them to register to vote, and Morehouse is its own precinct, so they register there, they vote there, everything is taken care of in-house. Outside of that, with the note of voter suppression, it is very real, very, very systematic, and it is troubling. We also encourage our brothers to make sure that they are calling their elected officials and being engaged and being involved in the political process.
Brittany, do you want to say what happens here at Howard? Do people want to vote here while they're in D.C., or would you encourage them to vote at home?
We've kind of left it up to the discretion of the students. Seeing as we're in D.C., we're in a different kind of situation, seeing as we don't have representatives to vote for, so we have a voice for the president, but we don't get to vote for Congress and things of that nature. So there are students that have decided that they want to submit absentee ballots, and that's fine. And we've been working with our state clubs to make sure that they understand the regulations and the dates and the deadlines so they can have those ballots submitted on time. Personally, I'm registered to vote in DC because this is my community, and I felt like that was a sacrifice I decided to make to be, engaged in my community and have a voice in this community. But I think it should be definitely left up to the students. As long as they vote, I don't really care where they're registered. So.
All right. Yes, Richard.
I want to go to what the professor was saying just a minute ago, and she talked about who's responsible for this. And I'm not going to pinpoint anybody, but I just want to bring it back to what we were talking about earlier. So we talked earlier about how, the Republican Party, they're not really creating African-American policies. They're not creating youth-centered policies. So we all know that to be what's happening in the status quo. Now you double that, so okay, they're not making policies to benefit African-Americans, Latinos, or young people, but they're going to turn out to vote. So what do? Well, maybe we pass laws that are completely and totally regressive. Maybe we purge them from the voter polls so we don't have to deal with them at all. So basically, they just want to take a pencil eraser and erase a whole group of people from the voting process so they don't have to deal with them. They don't have to pass policies that affect them. And then, we wonder why they're not talking to us, because not only do they don't have to talk to us, but they're going to create policies to make sure that we won't have an impact in how the election turns out.
Thank you. So we have a question
to the young people in this crowd. What I would recommend, regardless of who you want to vote for, Romney or Obama, and hear me on this for a second, the Tea Party, misguided, some good policy, some bad policy. I think those guys got a right model, and here's why I say that. Those are Republicans who said, we are tired of these Republican members of Congress not speaking to our issues. Whether you like their issues or not, they said, these are our issues. They went to Republicans. And they said, if you do not support these principles that we have, we're going to put somebody else in office. My challenge to the young people in this room, voter suppression, Republicans are pushing it, and there are Democrats and Democratic primaries that are pushing the same thing. It's bad, and it's being done on both sides of the aisle.
Which Democrats are pushing it?
I said it's been pushing some Democratic primaries. No, I'm saying that.
In the modern era?
What's that?
In the modern era?
In general.
And I'd echo that
Let me finish. Voter suppression is not anything new. Agree or disagree. That's something that's been going on for a long time, and it's wrong. That's my only point on that. It's not germane.
But the question,
I said in general, from the beginning of time, voter suppression, anytime you do it, it's wrong. But let me finish my point here.
So conservative Democrats used to do it when the Democrats had control, and now
Democrats
conservative
used to push
Republicans do it
suppression, Republicans push it, both sides have pushed. Dixiecrats, conservative Democrats, Bulldog Democrats.
So conservatives are the ones that typically do this.
Both sides have pushed it, and it's wrong.
But they're conservatives.
I'm not saying who's done it more or less. Both sides have pushed it, and it's wrong. That's my point.
Elroy, I think you're making a good point, because I do think there is it's an important political note to talk to folks about organizing and believe in them or disagree with them or not. The Tea Party has done a phenomenal job organizing. Hold on. Organizing and getting the attention. Definitely. But I will say this: I can't sit here and allow you to make an equivalence between the role that the Republican legislatures across the country have played in suppressing minority.
And it's wrong. I'm just saying it's wrong.
There's no
I agree with you. It's wrong.
Side in that regard.
I said in any facet, it's wrong.
And Elroy,
I didn't want to leave it out there that it's been done on both sides, and it's wrong.
Let's just have a historical lesson for a minute, since we're on a college campus.
I'm not trying to say who's done it more or less.
The reality is, for a long time, there were conservatives who identified as Democrats. Over time, those conservatives became Republicans. They behaved the same way. They just changed the title that they had on their name.
It's not quite that equivalent. Now,
that's simple. That's a simple
explanation. The state focus on voter identification restrictions only starts a few years, 2006, the first time you've seen any statewide focus. Those pre-segregation efforts are just that. You can't make any equivalence there. And if we wanted to imitate the Tea Party, and we have people with billions of dollars like Edelson's and others, then we could do it. But that's not it. We should take
go find you a billionaire and then organize your party.
The Tea Party to mobilize activity. Dr. Turley may not have been here when I talked about voting restrictions earlier, but I think that is the opportunity we need to take that can be interracial, recognizing that the assertion of democratic rights needs to be reaffirmed, because it is obviously under attack by groups of people who think they can win by keeping people away from the polls.
And to add to that, Jamal, I would argue, like the professor said, that if somebody paid me $1 billion to organize, I would go organize too.
To that again, closing that out, if you're going to vote for President Obama and if you're a Democrat, my only point there for the young people is take a playbook from the Civil Rights Movement or from the Tea Party movement. Don't just be a Democrat. and beat up Republicans. I'm not just a Republican beating up Democrats. I'm a Republican going to my party saying, here are the things that you're not doing for my community, and we try to demand those things to hold them accountable. All I'm saying is if you're going to vote for President Obama or President Mitt Romney, once you get elected, or if he wins, he'll be president.
All right, we got 15 minutes left. I want to get some more questions from the audience.
When you get finished, it's to hold your party accountable.
We're going to move to the audience now. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. My name is John Cox, class of 2004, Morehouse College. Thank the panelists for their great work here today. In looking at the political landscape, it seems that relationships across the aisle are becoming more and more toxic, and that there's less tendency to work together. It also seems that personal religious beliefs are more and more visible in the current political conversations and debate. And I just wondered where the panel sees this having effect in the future arc of politics in America. What do you think this is going to do to politics down the line? And that's my question.
As somebody that works on the Hill now, I haven't been there as long as some other folks, but I'll make this one observation. You're absolutely right. And if we continue in the direction that we're going now, I'm not sure how we'll ever get anything done. Now, look, the problem is that during Democratic administrations, there's pushback from the Republican side. During Republican administrations, there's pushback on the Democratic side. I'm going to try to make this point in a bigger sense and not be too partisan. But at the end of the day, it seems as if compromise and finding a way to work together has become a bad word and a concept to be avoided. If that were the case when our great country was founded, and we look at the history of our country, if compromise had been a bad word, there wouldn't have been no Declaration of Independence, there would have been no Constitution, there wouldn't have been much progress over the years on all the issues that matter. So yes, Democrats have to work with Republicans, and Republicans have to work with Democrats. I will say this, to turn on a little bit of a partisan hat. I have seen in the Senate, in particular, over the last couple of years, the filibuster used more times than ever before in our history. What does that mean? It means that important legislation like, economic development, whether it's healthcare reform, whether it's judges, whether it's all these things that are really important, have been held up from even having a debate, from even being brought to the floor and saying, you know what, I disagree with you on this, let me have my amendment, vote it up or down, and then let's go and have a debate so the American people can see what's going on. And here's what I say. If I have a disagreement, you and I, my friend, have had a couple disagreements today, and we've had a very civil conversation. I hope that we could take our model and incorporate it on Capitol Hill, because there's no civil conversation happening there, and it's long overdue for that to happen.
Did anybody else want to get in?
Well, I think that there's a little bit of 1984, the novel going on here, where non-issues get pushed to the front. Take, for example, this last fracas over Congressman Aiken in talking about legitimate rape. Now, before that, there wasn't an actionable issue, forcible rape, in the legislative agenda. Now, Democrats are partly responsible for even letting it go unnoticed. They had to push it out because it wasn't actionable. It was so absurd. Yeah. But nobody in the media, now the fourth estate should come into play, has ever focused on the fact that a lot of this stuff is distracting from real policy agenda. And one has to almost look at it as almost conspiratorial.
Exactly. Yeah. And Paul Ryan was one of the co-sponsors of that. Question over here.
Is there any other... my name is Shamel Nelson, and I attend Howard University of Middle School of Science and Mathematics. My question is there any other defense of same-sex marriage other than religious defense?
Can you ask it one more time? You all hear? So apparently it was a really good question because it got a lot of response from your crew. So can you ask it one more time, a little bit louder so we can hear you up here?
Is there any other defense against same-sex marriage other than religious defense?
Is there another defense of same-sex marriage other than religion? Against same-sex marriage? Anybody?
No.
No. There's no constitutional obligation to keep marriage in.
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your question.
To the note, when it comes to the federal elections, states usually define marriage. There is no federal policy that basically defines what a marriage is. So when it comes to the national debate, it's not really something that can be pulled into congressional.
Between a man and a woman.
Well, there was a Defense of Marriage Act.
There's no federal. It's not decided in Congress. It's decided by General Assemblies, just like the voter suppression laws that are in 7 of the 10 largest African American populations in the country. That's where they define our day-to-day lives. That's why I'm emphasizing be engaged, not just in the federal elections, not just the Senate, but the General Assemblies and State Houses.
At the policy level.
I think the young woman in the white, you were standing up for a long time. Did you have a question?
So what defines marriage?
Good afternoon, panelists. My name is Taylor Chanel Hawkins. I'm the 2012-2013 First Attendant to Miss Maroon and White in Morehouse College. My question, in the spirit of speaking from the heart, I'm asking because it genuinely did not sit well with me, the conversation that took place a couple of minutes ago regarding abortion. So, Mr. Saylor, could you please again explain briefly your position on abortion?
I have a daughter. She's 13 years old. If she got raped, I would have to pray on it, and I don't know how I would deal with that. I just don't know.
So your position is I don't know?
If it comes to rape, I don't know. I honestly, as a dad, I don't know. If you have children,
So the question is, can I amplify your question a little bit? What should the federal position be?
Oh, the federal position.
Right. You can't.
We're talking about
politics.
politics.
Have a policy that
Right.
says
I think the federal position, from my personal perspective on abortion, should be an individual choice. I don't think the federal government should be involved in that. That's as a dad. I don't think the federal government should be involved in that decision.
Hopefully, you can your party mates the same thing.
That's clear. Do we have a question over here? Young lady in the red, let's hear your name and where you're from, and speak up so we can hear you and your question.
My name is Faith Evans, and I attend Howard University Middle School of Mathematics and Science. And my question is directed to Professor Morris. You say that you're deeply rooted in the Bible. The Bible shows, my question.
That was Mr. Saylor.
Mr. Saylor, sorry.
No, it isn't.
You say that you're deeply rooted in the Bible, and I'm a Christian as well. And I think that when you're saying things about just somebody's sex, and I think that the Bible doesn't show any discrimination. So I think that didn't fit well with me at all. And I wanted you to clear that up on what you mean.
Yeah, there are 3 verses in the Bible, I don't want to cite them all here, that speak specifically to homosexuality. And if afterwards catch me and I can pull them up and you can read them. It doesn't talk about discrimination or love. It speaks specifically to a man lusting after a woman or a woman lusting after a woman. A man lusting after a man or a woman lusting after a woman. So the Bible is real clear on its position on same-sex or homosexuality. The Bible's not ambiguous on that. It's very clear. I'm not talking about discrimination or love. I'm just saying that act is very clear on that.
Okay, so Elroy's going to lead Bible study over here in the corner right after the federal discussion.
It's very clear on that.
Feel free to come down here and get your religious debate on.
Yeah, it's clear on that too, but that's not what
ma'am in the black shirt.
Hello, everybody. My name is Crystal Leapart. I'm a senior legal communications major from Detroit, Michigan, also. And I also serve as the president of the NAACP, and I'm a staff assistant for Impact, which is a nonprofit here in D.C. that is around civic engagement, political involvement, and economic empowerment.
Speak up just a little bit,
Okay.
and speak a little slower and a little louder.
Okay, I'll start over.
Thank you.
My name is Crystal Leapart. I am a senior legal communications major hailing from the great city of Detroit, Michigan. And on campus, I serve as the president of our NAACP, and I'm a staff assistant for Impact. My question is for anyone that wants to address this question. So you kind of spoke about the consistency of just African Americans being active in the political process and things of that nature. And we make that almost sound like an issue of our generation when that's an issue of every generation. So I wanted to know, besides just kind of saying how active we aren't in the process besides presidential years, how can we kind of keep people active all year round?
Well,
Honor.
Well, I can speak to what we've done actively with the SGAs, the HBCU SGAs. Coming out of conference.
Hold on a second. Can the folks who are leaving try to keep it down so that we can hear what's going on? Thank you.
We recently had a conference a couple of months ago called NASAP. It's a national, I forget the acronym, but NASAP is a conference for student leaders. It was Student Leadership Institute, and we got about 35 HBCU SGA presidents and queens. And we came together out of NASAP, and built a coalition, and we now have an HBC unified national voter registration drive where all HBCUs, or about 35 HBCUs, are working together to get all their campuses registered. The thing about it is we are doing this in concert, working under the radar, so we haven't done press releases and talked to big news organizations because we're not interested in having the publicity. We're interested in getting the job done. And there are some great leaders all the way from Texas down to Florida, all the way up north to Lincoln, who all are literally on a text message away from each other, who all work together for registration, issues of lobbying, or issues of making sure our voices are heard at city levels and state levels. And this type of coordination is happening, but it has to happen in a greater sense outside of SGAs into those NGOs. So the work is happening. Make no mistake about it.
I think he's right. I think he's right. On top of the work that we can do in voter registration, one issue that I've sort of been trying to grapple in my own mind is why is it that we've seen all the other groups, besides two groups. So we have seen the Latinos. When President Obama was elected, they came to Washington with an agenda, right? The LGBT community, when President Obama was elected, came to Washington with an agenda, and they pushed their agenda. But when it comes to the youth movement and millennials, and when it comes to African Americans, when President Obama got elected, we put our Hope and Change posters in our bedrooms, and we're like, yeah, we won. And we sat down. And we had no agenda. So people are saying the president didn't do enough for African Americans, but where were we saying, not our elected leaders, where was the people saying, this is what we want you to do. We want you to do X, we want you to do Z, we want you to do Y. And I think when we reelect him in 70 days, on day 71, what we need to do as a community, both as young people as well as African Americans, is we need to sit down and come up with a collective agenda. And we need to take our agenda to Washington. Just like Ms. Chisholm goes to Washington, our agenda needs to come to Washington, and we need to have a fight with anybody who's going to get in the way of our agenda. That's what we saw the Hispanic community do, and that's what we saw, and one community that I novel at is how they did it was the LGBT community. They came with an agenda, and if you got in their way, they ran commercials in your district. They sent out mail in your district. They did everything possible to show that you were an enemy to them. And people just fell in line. Nobody said anything because we all know that the politicians that we deal with, and Chris Christie said it best, they're affected by polls. They're affected by public opinion. So if we are that public that provides that opinion, then we need to have an agenda so our opinion can be educated.
Very good. All right, so we are at the end of our program. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for this great audience. Thank you to this great panel. And I want to thank Howard University for being great hosts not only of this event, but also of this entire weekend. As a Morehouse student, you make us all feel very, Merce graduate, you make us all feel very welcome when we're here on your campus. You always did, even when I was 19 and I was hanging out in the yard. So thank you all for having us back.
Thank you, panelists, and Jamal. And I want to, before you leave, I want to thank the persons from Rock the Vote who've been outside registering people to vote. I want to particularly thank Shaki Haynes, who's organized that. If he's around, let's give him an applause, please. And I was told that Ms. Maroon and White in her court, or maybe in the audience, are you here? They may have left already. Oh, yeah, they are. Welcome, welcome, welcome. To Howard. Now, at 5 o'clock, between 5 o'clock and 6:30 in the East Ballroom, the last of our sessions will take place. And the topic there is Jumping the Broom, the game, Rewriting the Black Love Playbook. And Mr. Lamar Rucker, the sheriff, will be there. And so please, if you have some time this evening, join us for that event. And then tomorrow, the big debate, the game before the game, the Morehouse-Howard debate, the Johnson-Mays debate, at 1 o'clock right here at Crampton Auditorium. So please come early. It's always well attended, and participate in that. Thank you all so much.
Pleasure sitting on the panel with you.
The AT&T Nations Football Classic returns to Washington, D.C. this Labor Day weekend. Events kick off August 30th and includes the rematch between Morehouse College and Howard University at RFK Stadium on September 1st. Kickoff at 3:30. Visit nationsfootballclassic.com for a full list of events and to purchase tickets. Sponsored by AT&T, Pepsi, and produced by Events DC. The AT&T Nations Football Classic returns to Washington, D.C. This Labor Day weekend, events kick off August 30th and includes the rematch between Morehouse College and Howard University at RFK Stadium on September 1st. Kickoff at 3:30. Visit nationsfootballclassic.com for a full list of events and to purchase tickets. Sponsored by AT&T, Pepsi, and produced by Events DC.